I always have trouble with my SharkFest keynotes because I never can figure out what I can say that I haven't said maybe dozens of times before by now. I don't really want to repeat myself. I don't want to say the same thing every time. So I thought, okay, fine, I'll make it easy on myself this time around. I'll talk about things I love about Wireshark and maybe a couple of things I don't. I can rattle that off in my sleep. And as it turns out, I ended up giving myself a difficult assignment because part of this process involved a little bit of introspection. And if somebody sits you down and says, I want to do some introspection, you immediately just kind of shut down and cringe and go to your not happy place. Because introspection is kind of like looking behind a major kitchen appliance. I mean, if you look behind your fridge, you can go, oh, the fact that our ice maker feed line is dripping, that's useful and actionable and relevant information, but it's also information that makes me kind of sad. And that's kind of where I ended up developing these slides. I do talk about some, actually a pretty serious subject in the open source world, but I will try to end on a more positive note, I promise. So having said the fact that I don't like to repeat myself, I'm going to show a slide that I show every keynote, which is the health dashboard of the project. Wireshark is doing well. We are up to either 3.5 or 6.5 million lines of code, and that's discrepancy comes from the fact that a lot of our code's handwritten, but a lot of it's also automatically generated, and we're kind of a unique project in that regard. A lot of our dissector code, we take these definition files and spit out code that we then use to build Wireshark. That code was written by over 2,300 authors. I do love that stat because that just reflects the fact that people do love to contribute to the project and help it grow. We have an active user community. That's reflected in the fact that we deliver on the servers we manage for macOS and Windows users about 1.5 million downloads a month. Most of those were for Windows, some are for Mac. There are also a bunch of Linux users out there. I just don't know how many because I don't have insight into download stats for the various Linux distributions. We sort of a bunch of protocols and a bunch of display filter fields, but the fact that our user community is active is also reflected in places like our Discord server. It's really active. We have a subreddit, which is managed by Carrie, who should be floating around there somewhere. We have mailing lists. They've kind of faded away a little bit, but that just is an artifact of the times. We have 2 yearly conferences. I mean, we have an active enough user community to manage that, which is great. But when I look at all these numbers and all this information, when I thought about it, the thing that I really love about this is the instant a connection closes. And the connection I'm talking about is the network connection that delivers Wireshark to your computer. Because that's the point where all the work that all the developers have done and all the lines of code they've produced, all that potential turns into empowerment for you. It turns into all the neat and cool things and useful things that you can do with Wireshark. And it's when the work of those 2,300 developers is then used by millions of people to do things that, to help keep their networks fast and reliable and secure. And this is probably one of the, now that I think of it, one of the things I love about Wireshark. And as you can see at the bottom of this slide, during the time I've been talking about this, a bunch of people have downloaded Wireshark. If you had a scrolling log of our download stats, you would see that, okay, this address just downloaded Wireshark, this other address just downloaded Wireshark, and so on. It's just a thing that happens continuously. And that's one of the things that I really love. On the other hand, Wireshark is 6 million lines of C code. If you're not familiar with C is a programming language that was developed in the early 1970s. It was developed in conjunction with Unix. They kind of, the people at Bell Labs developed one to develop the other, and it went back and forth quite a bit. Probably the most famous bit of C code right now is the Linux kernel. It's written in C, but Wireshark is a bunch of software is written in C. But at the same time, there are probably, there are arguably better languages out there, and two of them are Rust and Swift. I point those out because they have the backing of some big players out there. Rust was written by the Mozilla Foundation, but it's right now Google and Microsoft are migrating a bunch of their code to Rust. Apple developed Swift, and they're kind of migrating a bunch of stuff to that language, and they arguably are better. They have better memory protection and better threading and all this other stuff. So every time I write a good chunk of C or C++ code, I sit there and think, should I be doing this anymore? So yeah. But on a more positive note, I buried in those 6 million lines of code is an Easter egg. And if you fire up Wireshark on, I know none of you look at the text at the very bottom of the welcome screen, and I know none of you look at that text on 2 particular days of the year. That would be July 14th, which is the anniversary of our initial release, and on April Fool's Day. Because if you looked at it, you would see this little text that says, "You're sniffing the glue that holds the internet together using Wireshark, blah, blah, blah." How many of you noticed that? I see one hand, okay. And he's a developer, so. The reason that came about was because something I can't quite remember. Many years ago, I know what instigated it, or I don't know quite what instigated it, but I do know my reaction. I think, as I recall dimly, many years ago, something was referred to as the glue that holds the internet together, and it could have been something like a protocol like DNS or BGP or TCP. And when you refer to a protocol like that as the glue that holds the internet together, and you realize that you're developing a sniffer, what are you doing? So it was a short hop from there to sniffing the glue that holds the internet together on the front page of our website, which is something I did, and that actually lasted probably longer than you would expect. But it didn't last very long. Ultimately, I realized, okay, that's maybe not the most professional thing to have up there, so I took it down. But I thought, we got to put it somewhere. And so I added an Easter egg, and on these 2 particular days, that message will pop up. And along with the Easter eggs, buried in that 6 million lines of source code are some very pointed comments, like the PCAP file format isn't the simple thing that you might think it is. It's ended up being very complex, and there are a whole bunch of comments in there written by one of our developers about his struggles in getting that file format to parse correctly because people just dump a whole bunch of weird stuff into it. Anyway, that's a side note. One of the things that I did was in the release notes, our release notes were originally written in a markup language called DocBook, which is this very precise, exacting variant of XML. And you have to get everything right. And if you don't, then things get messed up really quickly. And so I had a placeholder bug, and every time I added an item to the release notes, I would copy and paste from this placeholder bug and just build up the release notes from there. And I had to put something in the placeholder bug, so I always put in some horrible thing that Wireshark did to you. And we don't use DocBook anymore. We use ASCII-Doc, which is a much simpler format. But at the same time, just because we had this tradition established, I had this placeholder bug that lists something terrible Wireshark does. In this case, Wireshark will grab your ID at 3 a.m., go to Waffle House, and start insulting people. Some of you are not laughing. I guess you don't know about Waffle House. I'll eat at Waffle House. They have some pretty good waffles, and they have an excellent breakfast. I'm not going to eat there at 3 a.m. Let me put it that way. They are open 24 hours. If you don't know about Waffle House, maybe ask some people who are chuckling, because they have a reputation. And actually, anyway, that's a different tangent. I love the fact that with this huge code base, we sort of accidentally built a time series data analyzer. And by that, I refer to the fact that initially in the project, the original name of Wireshark was Ethereal, and that I picked that name because I love the story of Ethernet's name. When Bob Metcalfe was originally developing Ethernet, he named it after the concept of the luminiferous ether, which was, back in the Middle Ages, people didn't exist. They didn't think vacuum could exist. They just rejected that idea out of hand. But at the same time, the light from the sun needed to get to the earth somehow, and they thought, okay, we have this medium called the ether, that's what light travels across. And that's why he came up with Ethernet. I thought that was just a delightful story, so when I needed to come up with a name for a protocol analyzer that analyzed Ethernet, I thought, fine, I'll flip through the dictionary and look for words that start with ether. Ethereal is an awesome word. That's our name. And so, just by the name, we were focused on network protocol analysis. The file format, PCAP, only lets you put in network packets. The whole program was focused on networking, but that restriction loosened over time. Somebody added support for dissecting JPEG images. So, if you had a JPEG image and a HTTP frame, you could dissect that. If I think somebody added support for MPEG streams, and so you could look at all the different frames in an MPEG stream. That's not networking. We added support for USB, and then as that focus on networking relaxed over time, we ended up with this thing that it supports this new file format, PCAP-NG, that can hold more than packets. We have this sort of general purpose data dissection engine. And a couple of years ago, when my old boss, who is now my current boss, said, hey, you want to adapt Wireshark to look at system calls and log messages? I thought, yeah, that's an obvious thing to do. And so now we have this sibling application to Wireshark called StratoShark. And as I said, we have this powerful engine that just does general time series data analysis, and I love this about our project. The thing is, for all the neat and useful things we've added to the code base, we've also dropped some stuff, which I'm not really thrilled about. And that is my juggling equipment, and those are my feet. One of the big things is accessibility. My boss lawyers a long time ago described Wireshark as the perfect open source project because you can have all sorts of people at the same time developing support for different network protocols, and they can do it in parallel and contribute that code, just all at once, and really build up the software that way. And the thing is, it's easy for a lot of companies to justify paying someone to develop support for protocol, but when it comes time to add support for things like accessibility, meaning support for screen readers and basically people who need to get the user interface in front of them in a different way than just through the screen, we kind of fallen short there. We have an open ticket for this, but I don't know when it's going to get fixed. Hopefully we can get it fixed at some point soon. Along with that, I kind of dropped the ball early on with a couple of things. One being multi-core support. Your laptop right now probably has 8 or 16 or 32 processors. Wireshark uses maybe 1.5 at any given time. We just don't do a good job of utilizing your full machine, even though you have a bunch of data in front of you. Part of that is the fact that parallelizing protocol analysis is just difficult. Getting all that right is just a hard problem because in order to analyze this packet over here, you must have first analyzed the packet before it, and you can only do that serially. But part of it's just some decisions I made early on in the design of the application. And similarly, we don't really support opening multiple files within the same instance of Wireshark. And that's just because it was originally written as an X Windows application, and X Windows that wasn't a thing. If you wanted another if you wanted to open another document, you opened another instance of the application. But maybe we can fix those as well. There are a lot of other open bugs that I'd like to fix. But this comes to the fact that I do love fixing things, and Wireshark has all these things that need to be fixed. So I love that challenge, and that's something that gets me up every morning. But you can't fix everything because if you throw yourself at this 24/7, you run into this problem. And burnout is a big problem in open source. It's such a big problem that there's even an XKCD comic about it. So it's huge. There are a couple of ways to look at this cartoon. One is, you have this person maintaining some software in Nebraska that everything depends on. One way to look at that is if you take that little block out, you get this Jenga effect where everything tumbles down. And I think that's probably the way most people interpret this. But when I look at this cartoon, I see that little block down there, it's software maintained by a single person. And I just see the weight of the world just pressing down on this poor person, just because I'm on the other side of that software development equation. And I just really, can really feel for their plight. And this is real. There are people out there who, are just like a one-person team developing these little libraries that people depend on. And I don't know if there are any of them in the libraries that we use, but this slide just illustrates the fact that Wireshark isn't just Wireshark. We pull in a lot of third-party code for various functionality, usually compression, but there's also packet capture and our user interface library and a whole bunch of other stuff. This is kind of the dream of open source. You have all these different packages that people develop, and you can kind of pick and choose and build up another application with much greater functionality that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But like I said, I don't know how many items on this list are in this situation. I just don't know. Not very many, I hope. So what makes open source special in this regard? Well, it's really easy to get into a situation where the project's needs exceed your ability to fulfill them. That's maybe not so special, but the fact that it can happen at web scale, it does make this sort of unique. There's also this thing that I think of as the dollar movie house effect, which I'll discuss in over the next couple of slides. But as you can see, if you go to Google and search for open source burnout, you're going to turn up all these links here. You're going to turn up even more than that. This is a problem that people have looked at and talked about and considered to be a very serious thing. In the last slide, I mentioned the dollar movie house effect. How many people have been to a dollar movie house? Good. When I was in high school, I worked at a movie theater, and it wasn't the most shiny theater in the theater chain. It was kind of run down, and we showed movies for $1. How do you think that worked? Nowadays, when a film finishes its initial run at the theaters, it will go to streaming. That's the thing that people do now. But back then, this is before streaming. It was actually kind of the early days of home video. When a film finished its initial run, the movie studios would end up with these shipments of movie reels that were sent back to them, and the reels were used at that point. They're all dusty and dirty and scratched up, and maybe the projectionist really liked a scene, so they sliced it out and took that scene home with them. They would do stuff like that. So the studios said, fine, we have all this product. It's not in good shape, but we can renter, I don't know the exact terms, but they probably rented or leased it out back to the theater chains and said, we'll do it at a lower rate. We do know this is kind of a lower quality product at this point. So the theaters were able to show films for $1. And I remember at the theater I worked, this let some films have really huge, long, extended runs. Like, I know Ghostbusters was at our theater for a long time, and The Breakfast Club, and Purple Rain. If you could go see Prince on the big screen do his stuff for an hour and a half for $1, how many of you would do that? Okay. But the thing is, there was this weird effect. People would come in, they'd pay $1 for a ticket, they'd walk up to the concession stand where I was stupidly working, and for 50 cents less than minimum, because I was a high schooler in Missouri. You're allowed to exploit people that way. Anyway, not that I'm bitter. They'd walk up, pay $1 for the ticket, then look at the price for the concessions and say, well, why are you charging full price for popcorn and soda? And I could tell that sometimes they were kidding, but sometimes they were serious. They just didn't catch on to the fact that, okay, we showed this film because there's a special set of economic circumstances that let us give you the discounted ticket price. And the other thing here is that the studios, I think the studios got 100% of the ticket sales. So the only reason the theater made money was because you bought popcorn and soda and candy. I think that's still the case. Anyway, there's just this set of mismatched expectations. And it's like, I'm like 17. I can't explain this, bit of economic weirdness. But, it's like, okay, Coca-Cola just doesn't give us a deal, dude. Okay, here, buy the Coke. But in open source, there is a similar set of mismatched expectations because, we have this weird set of economic circumstances. We can set up an environment where developers can contribute code and then build that code, and we can distribute the end result of that code for free. And people, they get this huge application for free, and they have these weird expectations that, okay, if you're giving this to me for free, then therefore you have no expenses. Well, hi, I'm Gerald Combs. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the Wireshark Foundation. We do really have some expenses. I'm responsible for paying that each month. Another misconception is, you're delivering this software for free. That means you therefore have infinite free time and you can give me unlimited personal technical support. I run into this occasionally. People will send me email directly, and I have like this template I send back saying, well, here's the list of community resources you can use. And sometimes, most of the time that works, but sometimes people just are very, persistent and no, I need help from Gerald himself. And it's like, no, you don't. But that leads me to this kind of, when I was talking about looking behind your fridge, this is one of the things I found behind the fridge, which is if you attach people's expectations to an activity you love, ultimately it will crush your soul. Sorry to say it's true. And I make it sound bad, but I should skip to the next slide. Because I'm hesitant to talk about this because all this open source burnout stuff, it does affect me to different degrees. I mean, Karen will tell you that there's just some days where I finish up my workday and am I not burnt out? But at the same time, I've been exceedingly and rarely lucky in this regard. But as I said, I'm hesitant to talk about this because you should be lucky like me is not very good or actionable advice for people. It's like, how did you get to be so wealthy? Well, I bought Apple stock in 1998 when it was 25 cents a share. Well, thanks. I need something I can work with right now. But with that out of the way, I will tell you, at least if I can't tell you how to solve open source burnout, I can at least tell you what solves it for me, and maybe we can extrapolate from there. The first thing is the thing that minimizes my burnout is the fact that you are all amazing. I mean, the Wireshark community is amazing. The problems I was talking about with the expectation mismatches and trouble that can come from that are really minimal in this community. And I am continually amazed at how helpful and congenial and just great you all are. Sorry. So I just kind of put the slide up to say that really does help our development team. The fact that when you engage with a project that you do it professionally. And high marks, keep up the good work. I will say that another thing that helps me is my family. My wife and daughter right now are sending, I'm sorry, my wife and I are sending my daughter to college right now. She discovered that she loves anthropology. She's pursuing her degree in that. But the fact that I love the fact that she found something she loves and is pursuing. That really does kind of help validate what I'm doing. But the fact that we're able to do this and provide for her and send her to college is a big deal, especially given the fact that I've been giving away software for 25 years, and yet we can still send our daughter to university. I don't know how that works. I'm not going to look at it too closely because, again, refrigerator, sad feelings. Finally, I had to sneak this in because I was working on these slides on the plane next to Karen, but so I kind of had to sneak in this last thing. But our daughter has an amazing mother, and then I have an amazing partner. A lot of you have met Karen. She is a beautiful singer. She is intelligent and funny, and anything that we do as a family that involves kindness and generosity, she's kind of leading the charge on that. And I'm going to trail off there because then this talk would go on longer, and you would kind of maybe vomit. But anyway, thank you very much, Hen, for the support. Another thing that helps is just talking with other open source developers. It's weird seeing people on the outside compare different open source projects because for whatever reason, some people think that we're all kind of in competition with each other. I remember there was a recent thread I saw about, somebody really likes TCP dump, and that, if TCP dump works great for you, use it. I encourage that. But he talked about TCP dump like it was a fierce competitor to Wireshark, and it's like, dude, we share core developers. I mean, at least one. No, the thing is, over the years, I've gotten to meet, Mike is a great example of this. I've gotten to meet other open source developers just, by traveling and talking and stuff. And we share a lot of the same problems, and we talk about those problems, and even just talking about that stuff really helps with things like burnout. But I love the fact that I'm able to go and meet these people. And I am also pleased to report that at least in the networking space, all the different people that work in open source software are just really brilliant and generous people. But we are very supportive of each other. If some other project needed some help, and I was able to provide it, I definitely would and have, and vice versa. We've gotten help from different projects. Our sponsors are amazing. As I said last night, the foundation has a mission to help people keep their networks fast and reliable and secure, and it's not something we can do by ourselves. And I love the fact that we have this community of not just open source developers, but people who make all these different products in this space that share that same vision and are not just willing but are eager to help the foundation. And when I get up there and say, hey, you should go visit the vendor tables. No, you should go visit the vendor tables. They do important stuff. And to kind of wrap up this half of the talk, came in at exactly half an hour. Well, yay me. I love the people I work with. In case you don't know, I kind of wear several hats. I'm part of the Wireshark Foundation. I'm on the board. I work at a company called SysDig during the day. We do cloud security, and I also work with the Wireshark development team. And but starting with the foundation, you have all interacted with Sherry, and that a lot of this would not exist without her and Angelo. So I just wanted to, I love the company I work for, Sysdig. It was founded by somebody I've worked with since, 20 years now. Oops, sorry, I cussed. But Loris Dejani, it was founded by him. He originally, was one of the WinP app developers, and then he founded a company called Case Technologies, which is a whole entire different story where I worked. But then he founded Sysdig, and at Sysdig, I work on the OSS development team. They pay open source developers. I work on Wireshark and StratoShark. There are other people that work on Falco, which is a sort of a cloud-based IDS or system, syscall IDS. But the fact that I have this internal group of people I work with that also do open source is invaluable. You just don't know. And even the marketing team at Sysdig is amazing. They are really mindful of the space. They don't just write up these press releases that say, we're really cool. No, they are very careful and considerate about the messaging that they send to the open source community. Finally, and this is kind of where you guys come up on the stage, but I love working with the Wireshark core developers. I don't think you realize how much you keep me from burning out, but you do. Anyway, I'm going to wrap things up there and let them come up on stage and introduce themselves.